as this transmits. And great. And tomorrow we're going to practice. The entire class is going to be practical tomorrow. So as I said, before we get into that, we need to theoretically understand it. Great, we are live. So it's time for us to go. Let me share my screen and let us get started. Well, here we are. And let us go to what I mentioned is going to be our tonight's topic. Here we have the question number 4 of the speaking section, okay? So as you remember, the speaking section contains 4 different questions or tasks. Remember that in ETS terminology, task simply refers to a question. It's an equivalent to question. Task or question is the same. So in this 4th question, remember that since the 2nd question, we've been discussing integrated questions, because you remember the first time we talked about the speaking section, I told you there are just 2 types of questions, although you have 4 different questions to respond. The first type of question only applies to the first question of the speaking section, and we have seen that way long ago. But now, since we got into the 2nd task, we've been discussing integrated questions, that is to say, questions that require us to receive material from ETS and then to summarize that. And trust me, this is going to be very similar to that. And actually, in my opinion, if you allow me to say so, dear students, this is the easiest question in the TOEFL exam, or at least in the speaking section, because you're gonna notice is basically identical to what you've been doing in the 2nd and the 3rd task, but with a little and very advantageous difference. Okay, so let's get into it. So in this final task of the TOEFL speaking test, you'll be required to hear a lecture and then give a short speech summarizing the main ideas of the lecture and the examples that are mentioned. You remember that in the 2nd and 3rd task, we've been receiving 2 materials from ETS, right? The first one was always a reading passage, and the 2nd was always a listening passage. In the case of the 2nd question, if you remember, we had to read a passage that discussed these university events, activities taking place on campus, new associations, new professors, new dining halls, etc., etc. And then we had to listen to a conversation, right? That was for the 2nd question. Then when we came to the 3rd task, what did we read and listen? We read a scientific article. We read academics, that is to say, biology, literature, physics, etc. And then we listened to a lecture on the same topic, right? A professor, a university professor, discussing those topics, those scholarly topics, right? Or scholar topics, excuse me, that were scholarly oriented. So now, in this 4th question, dear students, you're not going to receive 2 materials anymore. That's the reason why I told you this is actually easier. Because instead of receiving 2 materials, you're going to receive merely 1. And that only material you're going to receive is going to be a lecture. You listen very well. You're going to listen to a lecture, and that lecture is going to constitute the only piece of information you need to listen and receive from ETS in order to do what? To prepare a summary. Once again, that's what you have to do in this question number 4, as you did in the 2nd, the 3rd question. In question number 4, you do exactly the same. You're going to listen to this lecture, and after having, of course, some time to prepare your response, you're going to deliver a summary of such lecture, just as you did in the 2nd and the 3rd task, okay? So notice, as I say, it's exactly the same, but easier, because now, instead of worrying yourself and being super concerned and concentrated in synthesizing information from 2 different sources, you get rid of one and you simply concentrate on one source. So, well, I think it's easier, right? I think there's no manner to object that. Now, what about the timing? How does the timing work? The audio clip, that is to say, the lecture you're going to listen to, is going to last for approximately 2 minutes, okay? Notice it's a little bit longer than before. Nonetheless, it's not more difficult, or it's not something considerable. It's just 2 minutes. So notice it's a very easy thing, right? Great. So quickly repeating for those of you who are entering the class, we're discussing the 4th task of the speaking section. And we're saying that in this case, the only difference of this task when compared to the third one is that instead of receiving two materials from ETS so that we summarize them, we're going to receive merely one material that is going to be a lecture. And once we listen to that lecture that ETS is going to display to us, we're going to prepare a summary once again, and that is going to be our response. So notice, you're going to be listening to a lecture and then preparing a summary and delivering that summary. And here we were discussing the timing. How much does that lecture is going to last? Well, approximately 2 minutes, as you can see. And then how much time are you going to have in order to prepare your summary? 20 seconds. Notice that they are taking off or taking out a little bit of time because in the last questions, you got 30 seconds to prepare your response, right? In this case, you get 20, but it's not a big difference. Trust me, you're not even going to notice it. So 20 seconds to prepare your summary of the lecture you're going to listen, that as I say and repeat, is the only material you're going to receive from ETS in this question number 4. You don't receive a reading passage, not anymore, merely a listening audio. And when you listen to that audio, that is the lecture, as I say, you get 20 seconds to prepare your response, that is to say, your summary, and 60 seconds to deliver it. That timing has not changed. It's exactly the same than the second and third task, 60 seconds in order to frame your response within this minute, okay? And notice that once again, I have the picture of the journalist. I have not changed that on purpose. And that's very obvious because, as I told you, the second, the third, and the fourth task are all of them pertaining to the exact same category or type of question. All of them are integrated questions. And your task in all these questions, second, third, and fourth one, is simply to deliver a summary. And as we have discussed previously, I want you to notice that the image of this journalist should remind you, you don't have to offer your opinion in this question, okay, dear students? The only thing you do is to collect information, in this case, from the only information source they give you, the lecture. You take notes, right? As you listen to this lecture, you gather all those notes and you prepare a summary in 20 minutes. And remember, that summary must never be disrupted. It shouldn't be changing the information. If they told you, if the professor talks about Darwin's evolutionary theory and talks about the arguments in favor of this theory, you shouldn't be saying, well, the professor was wrong in this part because he ignored this other material. No, you shouldn't say that. Or if the professor was talking about adaptation, you shouldn't say, well, once the professor talked about his concept of natural adaptation, he forgot to talk about this. No, right? You shouldn't do that. Because remember, you are taking the role of a journalist. You're simply going to summarize, okay? You're going to summarize and you're going to transmit the information to these other people just as you receive it, okay? So please have that on mind. And well, as I said, this is all you have to know with regard to the general aspects of the task. Let me go and show you this on the simulator before I give you some examples. And of course, then we're going to practice together, okay? Well, let me access this very quickly. Right, here we are. And don't worry, because I'm going to give you some time to make questions later on, okay? Just give me a second. I want to clarify this before. Here we are. Well, let's go. So first thing, when you are in the last question, right, of the speaking section, this one, question number 4, a set of instructions. You know what to do. You don't have to read this. You listen to the lecture, 20 seconds to prepare the response, 60 to deliver it. Nothing to worry about. Next, and here, as I say, you get the lecture. As you can see, you are not receiving a previous reading passage or something, but the only material is the lecture, immediately the lecture. So notice, in this case, I can reproduce it as I always say, but on the exam, this is not the case, all right? The computer reproduces everything automatically. So you don't get the chance to skip or to go back throughout the passage or the lecture. You don't get the chance to pause it or to repeat it. You're going to listen to this lecture once, and that's all, okay? So in order to have something to help you out when summarizing this, you need to take your notes efficiently. We have talked about that. We have discussed efficient techniques and manners to take your notes, apply them, okay? This is the best time for you to apply that. So great. Listen to this lecture, as I say, once, not twice. As you can see, it lasts for 2 minutes and 9 seconds in this case. And once the lecture is over, the computer is going to take you to the next part. And here is where you respond. As I always tell you, there is going to be a voice in your headphones telling you, okay, guys, now please start preparing your response after the beep. Beep, right? You're going to listen to something like that. And our chronometer is going to appear on your screen with 20 seconds already set. And you're going to notice the chronometer is going to be going backwards, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. And once the chronometer is over, that is to say it reaches 0, that's it. The voice is once again going to speak, and it's going to say this time, now that you have prepared your response, start delivering it after the beep. Once again, beep, and then another chronometer, in this case with 60 seconds programmed. And well, once the beep sounds, the 60 seconds start to run. And well, they simply go back, as I say, 60, 59, 58, 57, 56, until you reach the last second. And then that's it. Your response is not going to be recorded. So please don't give yourself, in this case, the opportunity to speak more than the 60 seconds, but always frame your response when practicing within the 60 seconds, because on the exam, dear students, there is no manner your response is going to be recorded after the 60 seconds. So if you need to push yourself out in order to get this timing, do it right now when you are practicing. Because if you speak for more than these 60 seconds while you're practicing with me here tonight or tomorrow or until you take the exam, if you don't respond in 60 seconds, but let's say you take 2 minutes, on the exam, you're going to be in trouble because you're going to be used to that. And well, in the exam, they don't forgive you those things, right? They just take it. It's a very much rough and cruel exam if you think about it. So, okay, so please have that in mind. Well, and in this case, when the 60 seconds are over, well, you go to the writing section, right? Because that's the end of the speaking section. And although we have seen this for a week, approximately for 2 weeks, actually, maybe you say, well, the speaking section is super long. No, trust me that on the exam, this is just 20 minutes. Like the 4 questions, you're going to respond them in 20 minutes. So it's going to be a flash. It's going to be like this. It's going to be almost ridiculous because when you compare this to the other parts of the exam, the reading, the listening, and the writing section, 20 seconds is nothing, right? Because the other sections last for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 50 minutes, but this is just 20 minutes. It's going to be like this, all right? So when you finalize this, there's going to be a button here, next, and then you will move on, you will move on to the writing section, okay? Well, anyways, the writing section, we're going to discuss it later on this week. So that's it with regard to the 4th task. So I know you understand this because we've seen this before, but let me show you some examples, okay? Before I, of course, give you another structure and template for you to follow, as we always do, okay? So let's go access here our illustrations. Have them prepared. Let's go and listen, okay? As I said, no reading passage in this case, just a lecture. Well, let's go. Here we are. So let us listen, okay, to this lecture. Don't forget to take your notes as you listen, and then we're going to use this to listen to my response and compare our responses. Listen to this lecture on economics, if I'm not wrong.
Now listen to part of a lecture from an economics class.
Today we're going to talk about a microeconomic concept referred to as opportunity cost. This concept speaks about the potential loss or gain from potential alternatives when one choice or course of action is taken over others. In its simplest form, the opportunity cost is the loss of the benefit that would have been enjoyed had a particular choice not been taken. This feeds back into the concept of scarcity that we discussed in the previous class. The idea that resources, such as time or money, are finite, and therefore choosing one thing often means not choosing something else. All of you guys are familiar with this concept. It applies to our daily lives as well. When we're selecting a movie to watch, say, the opportunity cost is whatever else we could have done during those 2 hours. As students, many of you could have used those 2 hours to do further study for your exams, say, or worked a couple of hours at a shop. You could even have watched another movie. I'm sure all of you have watched films before and thought, what a stinker. So, how does this relate to business? Well, businesses have 2 types of costs: explicit costs and implicit costs. Let's imagine, for instance, that a company needs to buy $200 of office supplies and sends one of its workers out to procure them. The explicit cost is the $200 for the office supplies. The implicit cost is the money the company paid the employee while he was performing that task. The company would have had to pay that employee whether he purchased those supplies or not, but he would have been doing an alternative task instead. Therefore, this activity has implicit costs of both time and money. What could the employee have achieved instead during the time he spent at Staples buying ink cartridges? Whatever that might have been is therefore the opportunity cost.
All right, so that's it. Well, so now that we have listened to this, remember that immediately after, you're going to have the voice in your headphones telling you, okay, 20 seconds after a beep, beep. And well, imagine in this case that those 20 seconds have already happened, have already passed, and now you get the 60 seconds to respond, okay? So listen to how I responded to this question, and you're going to notice that I am following the same type of mechanisms we have used before. It's just summarizing the main ideas and including illustrations, but don't worry because anyways, I'm going to show you the structure I'm using, but first of all, listen to how I responded to that lecture, summarizing, okay? Not offering my opinion, remember, just summarize.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity cost, that is the value of every good when compared to what could have been done with the same good alternatively. Now, the professor gives an example of the real world when he says that if his students watch a 2-hour movie, what they could have done with the same amount of time would be their opportunity cost. They could have watched another movie or they could have done their assignments. Moving this into the business world, the professor says that companies have two types of costs, that is to say, the explicit ones and the implicit ones. If a company requires its employee to go and get a $300 supply, those $300 would be the explicit cost. But those $200 that the company may pay its employee to go and get them would be the implicit ones. And this would be also opportunity cost because they have to consider what that is a specific employee could have done for the same amount of money.
Great, there we are. So notice, I summarized the lecture, and that's what I did. I didn't offer my opinion. I didn't comment on the information. And notice, as I told you, that if you are a professional or expert on this area, you shouldn't be tempted anyways to discuss or to add material or data to what the professor has offered. In this case, they are not requesting your help in order to complement things, okay? So please resist that temptation. And if you know about it, if you know about the topic, just talk about what they say. Summarize what the professor said and conform yourself with that. It's not necessary to complement the information to make it, I don't know, more reliable or advanced, okay? Not necessary. Well, let's move on to a second example. Let me offer you here this other lecture. And please take your notes as you listen, okay? Let's go.
Let's continue our discussion of animal adaptations by talking about special features that make it possible for certain fish to survive in the deepest part of the ocean, a place where almost no light reaches. Specifically, I'm going to talk about two very different features. All right, to start with, some deep-sea fish have large tube-shaped eyes that always point upwards. One such species is known as the spookfish. These fish live thousands of meters below the surface of the ocean in almost total darkness. However, since their unique eyes point upward at all times, they have the ability to spot the faint outlines of fish swimming above them in parts of the ocean where a little light can reach. Once they spot such fish, they quickly swim upwards and eat them. I should also mention that their eyes are really huge, so they are able to detect even extremely tiny fish passing above. Next up is a type of fish that is able to create its own light. The lanternfish has a series of tiny organs throughout its body that give off light thanks to a chemical process called bioluminescence. Actually, this is the same chemical reaction that many different sea and land animals use to produce light. Anyways, the the lanternfish can make itself bright enough to attract the attention of other fish in its surrounding area. If these fish are small enough, they become prey for the lanternfish. This makes it a very efficient hunter, despite the darkness of its natural environment. Interestingly, they can even use this special light to protect themselves from other organisms by matching the intensity of light coming from above. This makes it much harder for potential predators to spot them from below.
Okay, there you are. Second lecture, and in this case, it was about natural sciences, right? So please let us go and listen to my response. Imagine that the 20 seconds have passed, sorry. And listen to how I responded, summarizing this lecture.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of features helping fishes to survive deep in the ocean's darkness. The professor mentions there is one fish called the spookfish that by having eyes always looking upwards can perceive some prey above in the only perceivable strokes of light and then to hunt them. Furthermore, the professor mentions that the lanternfishes that have bioluminescence can produce such an effect through internal organs. They are able, by this specific phenomena, to attract some prey, and when they are confused, they hunt them. They also can protect themselves by the same mechanism by matching the brightness of the environment and thus confusing those predators that are trying to hunt them.
All right, guys, great. Yeah, so there we are. Now, the thing is here, notice, and we are facing a very simple thing. We're facing a very simple task. And I think it's very noticeable and conceivable out of my responses that the only thing you have to do is to summarize the main ideas and illustrations from these lectures. But anyways, let me show you the structure or template that I was utilizing in these responses. That is actually very much simplistic. It contains 4 different steps, but all of them are intuitive, if you ask me. The idea here is that the first step contains, once again, an introductory phrase, and this was the one that I repeated in both of my responses. In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, and here, of course, I mentioned the main idea or title of the professor's lecture, right? For example, in the first lecture, what did I say? In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity costs. And then, well, I started with my summary of the lecture. What did I include there? The first lecture's point and illustration, second lecture's point and illustration, and third lecture's point and illustration. These steps here, dear students, of course, are obeying a particular pattern in the professor's lectures. You're going to notice as we practice tonight and tomorrow that professors normally organize their lectures following this pattern. They present an idea or a point, and then they illustrate it or exemplify it by any given instance. For example, when the professor described or defined what opportunity costs were, that in this case, of course, was the first lecture's point. In the first lecture you listened to, after he said, right, opportunity costs is this concept that talks about what you can alternatively do with your resources. He then offered an illustration, right? He said, well, if you are, for example, able to use 2 hours to do something, you could do different things with that amount of time. You could, for example, study for your assignments or your exam. Alternatively, you could also watch a movie that normally, of course, lasts for 2 hours, or you could go and get more money and resources working at the cafe or coffee shop. So notice how he's defining something, he's making a point, and then he illustrates by this model. And if you remember, actually, he did that once again, because after he finalized with the first illustration, he talked about the second lecture's point, and he said, you know, well, now, secondly, there are 2 different concepts you also need to understand, and those are extrinsic, right, and intrinsic costs. And he talked about how extrinsic costs are those ones that you do not actually expect to pay for. So for example, if you have an employee and you, I don't know, you command him to go and get for you a product. Let's say you want him to go and get supplies. If you have a restaurant, right? You want him to go and get, I don't know, tomatoes or onions for you. So you give this person money, $300, but that is an extrinsic cost because you are not planning that, or it's not included in the wages you pay to this employee. So notice how he gave an example. And then finally, he talked about a third point. He said, but nonetheless, when we talked about intrinsic costs, what you are talking about are the necessary and defined wages or salary you have defined to your employees. For example, maybe you are paying to your employee $1,000 per month in order to work for you and get these products and supplies. But apart from that, you have the extrinsic ones that, of course, represent the cost of the products and supplies themselves, right? So notice how the professor every single time makes a point and then an illustration. So follow that, obey that principle. And if you notice, that's exactly what I'm doing here in the structure and how I responded to the questions, all right? So this is how you respond. In this lecture, for example, we've been presented the fascinating topic of features helping fishes to survive deep in the ocean's darkness, right? First of all, the professor talked about how some fishes have the opportunity to employ some of their organs to look at extreme distances or places. For example, he talks about the spookfish and how this organism manages to elevate its eyes upwards, and by doing so, manages to perceive all the possible prey going above. And whenever he perceives one of them, goes up and hunts them, right? Very easy. And then the professor talked about another point, or made another point, and he talked about how some organisms have internal organs that allow them to create, let's say, hooks or deceivements or attracting possible prey. And he talked about the lanternfish, right? How the lanternfish creates by a process called bioluminescence, and a stroke of light within its body. And by using this mechanism, attracts prey and hunts them, right? So notice how the professor talks about a point, then an illustration. Follow that pattern. And notice that here I'm including a third lecture's point, but in any of our examples until this point, we have listened to a third point. And that's because I want you to comprehend this structure is flexible. If you get 3 points, include the third point and the illustration, of course. If you receive, in a very unlikely case, but anyways possible, a fourth point, mention it. Mention the fourth point and the corresponding illustration accompanying that fourth point, okay? That's how you do it. You always adapt your structure to the quantity of points and illustrations you have received, okay? Very good. Now, I want to give you time and space for you to make questions. Do you have any concern or consults about this? Any questions, dear students? Daniela, Grisel, Arlette, questions about this structure or anything we have discussed until this point?
No questions.
All right, thank you very much, Arlette. What about the rest of you guys? Any question about the structure or the material?
No, teacher, I am fine.
Great. Well, so if there are no questions, let us go and practice, okay? I think that's the best thing we can do together. Well, so let me here present to you our material to practice tonight. Over here, and let's go. Second, looking for it. Okay. So please prepare your headphones because we're going to listen to several lectures, okay? And then one by one, you're going to offer your responses. We're going to listen to this in 20 seconds to everybody, and then one-to-one you respond in 60 seconds, as we have done before, okay? So please grab your piece of paper, grab your pencil, and start listening to this first lecture that we're going to use to practice together, okay? So listen carefully and don't forget to take your notes.
All right. Now that you all have microscopes at your tables, I want to explain how they work and how to use them. First of all, you should know that they are compound microscopes, so they can magnify objects up to 1,000 times their size. These microscopes have two systems, an illuminating system and an imaging system. You'll see that the illuminating system has a light source built in, and you can control it by adjusting the lever on the side. Why is this important? Well, the specimen must be pretty thin, or let's say transparent enough to let light pass through it. So the light source controls the amount of light that passes through the specimen. Okay, the other system provides magnification. Use this lever to switch powers. So when you switch to a higher power, you see a larger image. And when you switch to a lower power, you see a smaller image. But I should remind you that the field of view is smaller at a higher power. In other words, at a higher magnification, you see a larger image of a smaller area. Okay, so what about the focus? Well, these microscopes are parfocal, and that means you usually don't have to refocus when you switch to a higher or lower power of magnification. But there are two adjustment knobs, the larger one for coarse adjustment and the smaller one for fine adjustment, just in case.
Using the main points and examples from the talk, describe the two major systems of the laboratory microscope, and then explain how to use it.
Beautiful. Okay, guys, so we've listened to this lecture on how to use microscopes, and it's your turn to respond, okay? So let's go and access our chronometer, and here we're going to be able to practice together. So great, let us go. Here we have the chronometer. I'm going to set it in 20 seconds. Here we have it. Okay, so please, dear students, all of you, start preparing those summaries now. Okay, there you are. So let us start with this first round of responses. Okay, so please, dear Daniela, you're going to help me out with this one. And please start responding to the question now.
Okay. In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of how is it composed a microscope. It's important to note that you can see 1,000 better that you can see with your eye. And in the first part, we can see that it's an illuminating system that is very important to the microscope. And you can see thin things, and you can see the little things too. In the magnification too, that you can see a large and smaller things. And another topic is that you can focus the microscope too. In this kind of microscope, you don't need to focus, but sometimes when it's small and it's very big, you can do it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, dear Daniela. And now let's move on with Grisel. Okay, so please, dear Grisel, you can start. Oh, there's a teacher and Siga can speak. Okay, no, it's okay. Dear Grisel, don't worry, for sure. Okay, so you're gonna help us tomorrow. All right, don't worry. So let's go with Arlette. Please, dear Arlette, you're going to be responding to the question, and you can start doing so now.
Okay, in this lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic of the different types of microscopes in the laboratory. The microscopes are really important to the investigation of many species or different kinds of scientific issues. You can there are two different types of systems: the illuminative system and the magnification system. The illuminative system try to use the light to see the object, use the transparency of the object. The magnification system use the higher or the lower power to see through things through the matter. Okay, that's all.
All right. Thank you very much, Arlette. Fantastic. Great, guys. Well, so let me offer you some feedback, okay? So great. I think that both of you were fantastic, actually. Of course, you've gotten a lot of practice already because we've done this before several times. And it's exactly the same, but easier, as we have discussed, right? So Daniela and Arlette, I don't have any commentary, particularly for these responses. But as I say, always try to find out by yourself how much adequate time it's good for you to invest on each point, okay? Because remember, try to do everything. You can certainly spend more time discussing the illustrations if you want. In this case, there were no illustrations, as you noticed, at least not illustrations as such, some commentaries, but you're going to notice that in the other lectures, we're going to have illustrations, and you can discuss them in more length if you want. But as I say, everything depends on your own measurements, okay, of the times and also how you want to include the information within their response, okay? But great, I think it was fantastic. Let's move on to another exercise, a bunch of them. So here we have this one. Let's use it. So please start listening to a second lecture, and then we're going to do the exact same procedure. Okay, let's go.
If a consumer has to choose between two products, what determines the choice? Assume that someone, a purchaser, is choosing between two products that cost the same, okay? If people have a choice between two identically priced products, which one will they choose? They choose the one they think is of higher quality, of course. But what does it mean for a product to be a high-quality product? Well, business analysts usually speak of two major factors of quality. One factor is reliability, and the other is what we call features. So reliability. What's reliability? Well, a product is reliable if it works the way we expect it to work, if it can go a reasonable amount of time without needing repairs. If a product, a car for example, doesn't work the way it should and needs repairs too soon, we say it's unreliable. So product reliability means basically the absence of defects or problems that you weren't expecting. It used to be that when people thought about product quality, they thought mainly about reliability. Today, it's different. People do still care about reliability, don't get me wrong. It's just that manufacturing standards are now so high that, we'll take cars for example, today. Today's cars are very reliable. So reliability is important, but it's not going to be the deciding factor. So if reliability isn't the deciding factor anymore, what is? Features. All those extras. The things a product has that aren't really necessary, but that make it easier to use or that make it cool. For example, new cars today are loaded with features like electric windows, sunroofs, air conditioning, stereos, and so forth. When people are comparing products today, they look at features because reliability is pretty much equal across the board. And that's why manufacturers include so many features in their products.
Great, there we are. So it's your turn, dear students, to go and practice with me, okay? So I'm going to, all right, I'm going to somewhere, okay, great. I'm going to minimize that. And now let's go and enter the chronometer, okay? Here we are, so let's go. Beautiful. So, dear students, please start preparing those responses now. Amazing. Well, now let's go and have your responses, okay? In this case, please, dear Arlette, you're going to help me out. So please start responding to the question now.
Okay. In this lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic of how customers choose between two products. In actuality, the higher quality it's really important in the mind of the consumer. There are two factors who are important in this case: the reliability, reliability, and the features. For example, car, the reliability is the absence of the problems in the obstacle in the car. But right now, in the actuality, the features are more important to the consumer. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Very good. And now let's finalize then with Daniela. Okay. So please, Daniela, you can start responding to the question now.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of how the consumer can choose two products with the same price, and this happens with the higher quality. The higher quality have two major facts that is the reliability and the features. The reliability is how the product work without repairs, with absent of defects. But this is not the better fact to choose a product. The features are the extras and is how you can use in the easy way the product, and you can choose how is the better product with this. And I don't know. It's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Well, guys, so let us discuss this then. Great. So I let in your response, I loved how you included the main idea at the beginning, right? It was very good. It was a very superficial but effective mention of the overall idea of the passage. It was great. Maybe the word you were having some troubles with, reliability, right? I'm gonna write it for you in the chat box. It's a very interesting word. Reliability. Reliability. I don't know. I understand it that way. I'm not sure if it is understandable, but reliability, more or less like that, reliability. But yeah, like whenever you happen to find this type of problems, as I have said before, just try to look for an alternative, right? In this case, of course, well, maybe it was important, right, to mention the term because it was a main idea in the passage. But as I say, maybe when you are listening to that and you say, hey, this word, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. What you can do is to do exactly what I did with you. That is to say, writing how you pronounce it, but on your paper. Like, for example, let's say you don't know how to pronounce reliability. So when you listen to that, you say, oh, I'm not sure how to pronounce the word. But as you listen to the word, write it on your paper as you would pronounce it, right? Because when you listen that way. Okay, you say, well, I can pronounce it this way. So you write it as you would pronounce it, not as you would normally or correctly in a grammatical sense or orthographical sense, write it, right? So as I say, try to write the word on your paper as you would pronounce it instead of how you would orthographically write it, okay? That is a recommendation. But the rest of it was great. Maybe you employed too much time talking about reliability because you didn't have too much time to talk about features, right? There was, at the same time, a very important point and topic in the lecture, right? But as I say, that's a matter of calibration. Try to measure by yourself and to what point is good to talk about the first idea and then stop and move to the other one, okay? But try to include both of them in an equal basis if you can, okay? But great, it was a very good response. And then we had Daniela. So I loved Daniela how you, in this case, offered the very important point the professor made in how cars nowadays have a very high standard of reliability, which means that people are not actually caring about reliability anymore. Or it's not that they are not caring, it's just that it's not the deciding factor, as the professor said, right? And you talked about that, you mentioned that. And that was a very important idea and remark the professor made. It was fantastic that you included it in your summary. The rest, it was fantastic. And as you notice, sometimes it's not necessary to use the entire minute. In your case, I find that your response was complete and very good without using the entire minute. So if that happens to you, just stay silent and let the time happen and pass until it's over. And then the computer is going to take you to the next part. Okay, but it was great. It was fantastic. Awesome. Let us go to one more, okay, before we say goodbye tonight. But let us go to another example, okay? There we are, and let us listen to this third lecture, okay? Let's go.
Now let's talk about a particular cultural process, diffusion. Since the beginning of human history, diverse cultures have taken advantage of one another's innovations when they've come into contact. Diffusion is the process whereby something cultural, like a custom, a type of food, or an invention, is spread from one group to another, or from one society to another. One group adopts a cultural item, or more selectively, just part of a cultural item, of another group, you see? Now, diffusion can occur through a variety of ways: military conquest, or tourism, or well, even something like the influence of satellite TV shows around the world. For example, take something like reading a modern newspaper here in the U.S. Have you ever thought about where the letters, the characters on the page you're reading, where they came from? They were borrowed from another culture many centuries ago. Then the printing of the words, well, that process was invented in Germany. And finally, the paper itself, paper was invented in China. These innovations from all over the world were shared across cultures over time, and so today we have newspapers in the U.S. So the process of diffusion might take place over long distances and over long periods of time. Now, I'm not saying that diffusion happens easily. As I mentioned, sometimes it's selective. For instance, many people in the U.S. have accepted the practice of acupuncture, the Chinese practice of using needles to cure disease or relieve pain.
All right, beautiful. There we are. So now let us go and prepare your responses, your students, and then we're going to finalize with that. Okay, so please all of you start preparing those responses now. All right, there we are. And now please, dear Daniela, in this case, you're going to help me with the first response. So please, you can start delivering it now.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of cultural process called diffusion. This process talks about the costumes, type of food, and how the society can change to another society. They can mix. And the diffusion could be talk about the tourism or the television culture, how the lectures are changing the world too. One example is that how is the diffusion inventing things, like the paper was invented in China and the journalism was invented in Germany, and how is changing in the United States. The diffusion sometimes could be selective. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for the response. And now let's finalize with our dear Arlette. Okay, so please, Arlette, let's start responding to the question now.
Okay. In this lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic of the cultural process called fusion. The fusion is process to something cultural like food or some behavior can adapt from one group of people or culture to another. For example, the press are invented in Germany and the paper in China, but there's something new like the newspaper, this type of press are a fusion of two different cultures. The world are right now are full of this type of fusion. Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. All right, so great, guys. I think that both of your responses were excellent this time. And well, as you can see, this is what we're going to be practicing tomorrow as well. And of course, we're going to have results participation too. But thank you very much to those of you who participated and to all of you for having listened, okay? So before we go tonight, as we always do, please help me with your kind responses to our traditional poll. And let me please take your assistance, all right? Very good. So please listen to your names. Okay, awesome. So we have Arlette Gabriela.
I'm here.
Thank you very much, Arlette. Then we have Daniela Lourdes.
Here.
All right, fantastic. And finally, we have Grisel. Don't worry, Grisel, you don't have to say present. I got your assistance. I know you are sick. All right. Thank you very much. I got you. Well, thank you very much, guys, for your assistance tonight. It was a pleasure always. Yeah, we got you, Grisel. Don't worry. Very good. So, well, I'm going to be seeing you then tomorrow to practice this together. Don't forget to bring your microphone prepared and your headphones, all right? So, well, have a wonderful night, and I see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.